To the Point is your source for bite-sized education commentary on the important issues impacting education today. I can promise you, your hosts won't always agree on the solutions, but their conversation adds unique insight to the national dialogue. When you need education policy analysis without the fluff, get to the point.
Hi, I'm Jim Horne, and this is Doug Mesecar, and this is To the Point. Florida has always been considered a leader in education reform and particularly school choice. This year was no different than in the past, and maybe even to an even higher degree, in that the state of Florida, led by our Speaker of the House, took upon himself to make a dramatic move forward in education reform, but especially in school choice. HB 1, which involved the Universal School Choice Bill, a Universal Education Savings Account, again, puts Florida, I believe, at the forefront. Florida has historically been a leader and has enjoyed a lot of success. And, maybe it's up for argument whether Florida is the, quote, choiciest state or the best state. I'm bullish on Florida. I'm a resident of Florida. I am a former legislator and participated in the early parts of the education reform efforts. So education savings accounts, Doug, what do you think of them? Or is that a good move, or is it just another gimmick and wasteful spending? What's your take on a universal school choice?
Yeah, Jim, it's a great question. And you can make an argument, Jim, that Florida was following Arizona's model and even Iowa. So I'm not sure Florida was first to this game when it comes to universal education savings accounts. But that being said, Jim, here's the question. Why are we giving money to parents who could otherwise afford to send their kids to private schools, right? That's one of the chief criticisms. And probably, Jim, one of the reasons why you don't see this more, frankly, in blue states is they want to help the kids who can't afford to do it on their own. And that's where they kind of draw the line. How do you address that, Jim? How does the folks in the Florida legislature address that particular argument?
Yeah, that's a great question, Doug. I mean, if you start from the perspective that these resources belong to the government, and then you can certainly make the argument that why would you direct those resources to families that are already paying for private education, wealthy families that send their children to very expensive private schools. So why would you want to supplement those parents? That's a valid question if you believe that the tax resources belong to government and that government is an entity in it to itself. But if you believe that these resources are funds that have been contributed by taxpayers, then it changes the way you view it. So it's money that the taxpayers are paying for and into education, and that they should get a return on those dollars that they already pay into it. So that's one way you can certainly justify it. But ultimately, the question is, does school choice work? Does it really have a positive impact? Because, there would be some that says, hey, all you're doing is extracting students out of a public system and leaving those that can't escape the public system in the public system. And that the students that can escape, and they find some way to choice. But I think the data points are pretty persuasive in that you've seen Florida over the last 25 years kind of rocketing towards the top of the states that have great academic results. There was a time, honestly, Doug, when I think Florida ranked 48th, and we used to joke that thank goodness for Mississippi, or we would be almost last. And so through school choice, and I've seen it personally, the competition that it creates. One of the very first, quote, voucher programs that created opportunities for students with special needs. I think 450,000 students qualified for that voucher, but only like 40 or 50,000 students actually took the voucher. So that meant that 400,000 students stayed in the system. And interestingly, what we saw was that the public system, because of the competition with the private system, got much better. And the performance of those students who stayed in the public system did much better and performed much better. So I think the competition has had a positive result. And so I think that has been a huge factor. I think you add in that Florida has a pretty aggressive and robust accountability system where we grade schools and we will create some forms of punishment, even though I'm not sure I've ever seen an actual public school be closed. I think have been a few, but there's not many. Clearly, you can have accountability, but I don't really think we've seen school closures. But I think that school choice is really positive. We'll see in the next few years. We will see what happens in Florida. You don't really know how many students will choose to use one of these education savings accounts. What's really interesting to me is everybody just assumes that the ESA is a model for you to take state money or money that is contributed to the public system and that you take it to a private school. But it's not just private school. Homeschoolers can use these dollars to purchase different kinds of things that they want. There's a thing called personal education plans, which means that you can actually take this money. Maybe you could go to a virtual type school or for some or part or all. And it has tremendous amount of flexibility. And that's the part that I'm very excited about. I'm very interested to see how that actually gets executed and how that's going to work. And some of the dollars that you don't spend, so it's going to be roughly about $8,000 per student that gets funded into a special account with one of the scholarship funding organizations in the name of the family. And if they don't spend it all, they can accumulate it for post-secondary expenses later at post-age 18. So there's a lot of really kind of neat pieces to this, but I think only time will tell. And, there will be a lot of critics, I'm sure. And then there will be those that are also pro school choice, but they're going to want to debate like you want to debate with me that Florida's not the leader. Florida might be at the top, but they're not the leader. I'm going to always take the position that we are the leader.
Well, Jim, in terms of that being the leader or one of the leaders, what does the Florida approach mean for other states? Like, I live in Virginia. Could it be exported to Virginia? Or pick a state like, I don't know, Oregon or, that's my question, Jim, because, if we set aside, and that was quite an advertisement for school choice you just gave, by the way. But when you look at states that, maybe they don't have the history of school choice that Florida has, or they don't, the politics don't line up. I mean, you got kids in school today, tomorrow, that we need to do the right thing by them as well. And are there other pieces of what Florida's doing that, particularly as your governor runs for president, there are probably ideas now. You can't do a school choice law nationwide, not easily anyway. Probably not at all, given politics. But what aspects do you see, Jim, are like what Florida's doing? It was big news, Jim, when Florida moved away from the FCAT, right, and went to this different approach on assessment. And, partly, the idea, right, the marketplace of education, to use sort of the Florida model, the way you think, private school, homeschool, charter school, regular public school is going to be probably, if not the dominant, then pretty darn close mode of education for most kids still, even with a lot of choice. What is in the Florida model today that could help those states, or that if DeSantis gets elected president, like what would he want to share with the rest of the country? Much like your former governor's brother, who I worked for once upon a time, when he got into the White House, a little law called No Child Left Behind.
Yeah. Well, let's state the obvious that the public education system, I still believe, will be the wheelbarrow of education. It will be carrying the heavy load, and it will still be the dominant piece of the education landscape. But it doesn't take, quite frankly, I've heard a couple different governors say that only takes about 20% to impact the majority. So a small portion that choose, a choice creates enough competition that can make the bigger sort of monolithic system better and more competitive. And I do believe that will probably be the case. And I think that you're going to begin to see that's maybe less threatening. Initially when you go down this path, the crazies to the right and left, they get out and they say all the kind of crazy things. And those on the other side of school choice say that it's the end of public education. No, it's not. I don't think anybody really believes that. Those on the right think, hey, we're going to be able to eliminate the public education system and put everybody maybe in a religious school. No, we're not. That's not going to happen. So the ideas, begin to kind of, those radical ideas or viewpoints, I think, begin to dissipate. And then I think, folks begin to see, where and how it can fit. What the pandemic has taught us for sure is that we all live our lives quite differently. The way I operate is quite different than what I did before the pandemic. I was on the road a lot. I did a lot of face-to-face meetings. Now I do a lot of stuff virtually, as we are doing this podcast virtually. And I think that, business people who want to travel but work remotely, maybe they want to take their family with them when they travel. And so they're going to want more flexibility in education. And so I think we're also beginning to see school choice not in I'm unhappy with public education and I want to move out of public education, but I think you're seeing folks look at choice as sort of agnostic, not pro public school, anti public school, but as a variation of modalities that can fit the needs of a family. And I'm beginning to see schools that are being created very differently. They're not now created from an 8 to 3 o'clock, with 25 butts in a seat. Right now you're seeing variations of it. And I think that to me will break down some of the walls that separate us on school choice that might start to answer that question, whether more bluer states would maybe embrace it. Maybe they won't embrace a voucher to go to a private school, but they probably would embrace just more choices, more flexibility, more opportunity.
Well, Jim, you cleverly redirected my question to be all about choice again. So, I'd love to pin you down. What of the DeSantis platform do you think would be something that, besides choice, that would be things that we should look at as a country? Because, Jim, there's been kind of a consensus. You were part of it. I was part of it, around what it took to really, address, frankly, back to the nation at risk, just the shortfalls and the lack of performance. And I'm not sure, Jim, that, we saw as much gain as we would have liked nationally, right? We certainly saw bright spots, but it also feels, Jim, that coming out of the pandemic, it's time to try some new and different things. Obviously, some states are really going deep on choice. Beyond that, Jim, and I know we got to get to the point, what would be the 2 or 3 things that you see happening in Florida that you'd love to see other states take on?
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to use that to spring forward and say a DeSantis presidency, right? If he became president, what could you see him doing that he's pushing out to all the states? And one thing he doesn't get much credit for, but it's his focus on teachers and raising teacher pay. And, while I've always said it's not about the pay, but it really is a lot about the pay. It may not be all about the pay, but pay is an important part. And we certainly have not been able to recruit the best and the brightest into the profession. Quite frankly, we don't treat it like a profession. We call it a profession, but is it really like lawyers, doctors, engineers, accountants? No, it's not. We don't do it that way. but he has dramatically increased the teacher pay in Florida, set, floor levels of starting pay, now working on the, what happens when you increase starting pay, then you end up with compression, right? You got veterans that now don't make a lot more than the rookie teachers. And he's doing a lot to kind of get the veteran teachers pay, where teachers can be paid well without having to feel like they have to leave the classroom to be successful financially. And now, at least in Florida's case, and I think it's probably this way everywhere, is more than half the teachers are coming through an alternative pathway. They're not coming through the traditional College of Education. So they're coming, sometimes they're career changers, sometimes they're coming different paths. He's opened that up more, made that easier. He's tried to recruit those retiring from the military to come in and be teachers. So he's put a dramatic focus on teachers. And I think that's one thing you would see him do for sure.
Jim, are you saying we could see a DeSantis, Bernie Sanders bipartisan agreement? Because Bernie Sanders has a federal bill to make the minimum teacher salary $60,000 per year for every teacher. I kind of hear you saying there could be some connection there. Crazier things have happened.
That doesn't mean that, those of a more liberal persuasion can't get it right occasionally, right? Now, they would probably want it without any kind of ties to any kind of performance. I would think that, knowing DeSantis and his conservative roots, he would be all about increasing starting pay, increasing veteran pay, but I think he's not going to just dump money in there for no reason without some expectation that we're also going to have teachers that are well trained and that they're getting results. Because at the end of the day, if we're not getting students learning and progressing and gaining a year's worth of knowledge and a year's worth of time, then it's nothing but a colossal waste of money. So, yeah, I think that they would agree on increasing starting pay. I have my doubts that Bernie would go along with some of the other requirements of it, but you never know. You just never know till you get there.
Once upon a time, George W. Bush and Ted Kennedy came together to pass historic education reform. So who knows? There may be a new era of bipartisanship in the future.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, you had gotten to the point on school choice. I love your point about teacher pay, and I think that'll be, and just the professionalization of teaching, the number one in-school factor that affects academic achievement, Jim, quality of the teacher. So let's come back to that, Jim, and see where we agree and disagree on our next episode of To the Point.
Professional pay for professional teaching. That'll be our next one.
To the Point is your source for bite-sized education commentary on the important issues impacting education today. I can promise you, your hosts won't always agree on the solutions, but their conversation adds unique insight to the national dialogue. Jim Horne is a Strategist partner and former Florida Education Commissioner serving under Governor Jeb Bush. Doug Mesecar is a Strategist partner and a former teacher. He's also served as a senior EdTech executive and a U.S. Department of Education Deputy Chief of Staff. This episode is powered by Strategist Group, a national education management consultancy. To learn more, visit www.strategistgroup.com and follow us on LinkedIn. When you need education policy analysis without the fluff, get to the point.